So you found the skeleton. How would you tell it's a representative? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the after show. We may be having a few more people join us. Ahmed has the link. It is late where he is, though, so I am not positive if he will be joining, but he may. I did also get a request from Nestle20 to come in, and I have let him know. Message me, and I will get that to you. I'm not going to put it just in the chat. So I think I will start with the way I usually do these, which is go around the panel that's here, and as more people join, they can also be asked the same question, and simply ask them what they thought of the debate, and from there we can jump into more discussion. So I will start with Jackson Wheat. Jackson, what did you think of the debate?
Jesus Christ. You gave your opening, and it was very good opening. Like, you just laid out example after example after example of, here we know the exact mutations involved. We know when these mutations happen. We know what the changes were, what precipitated the mutations, all this stuff. And he dodged all but one of your examples, because you eventually brought him back around to the E. coli example, which is, again, a very good example. And his response was essentially just denying that the changes were, or that the mutations were random. Like, he literally said at one point, transposition is not a mutation, or transposition is not random, something like that. It's like, what are you talking about? There were several times like that where I just was like, what on earth are you talking about? The other thing was with endosymbiosis, when he said, oh, well, how do you get the DNA from the circular bacterial DNA to the linear chromosome? It's like, viruses like do this for a living, right? That's their whole job, is getting their DNA or RNA and then turning it into double-stranded DNA and then inserting it into our genome. That's like their whole job. And there were several times like that. It was just like, what? But he's 100% intelligent design memes from the Discovery Institute, which I did not know going into it. I don't know if you did, Dapper, but from the two videos of his that I watched, he didn't make any reference to any specific arguments, like literally no specifics. And so when he came in and he's just spouting them off left and right, I was actually surprised by that. So that was, but you did a very good job. And I don't think he answered, or he didn't answer most of your questions. He didn't respond to most of the points. He just kind of said, well, this is really cool. Kinetochore is cool. Sure, it's cool. So what? Kinesin's cool. Okay, so what? Or, oh, I don't believe this is random. Okay.
Yeah, there was a lot of what RJ and I both, and I think you too, Jackson, like to call the gee whiz.
Yes.
Which is like, gee whiz, this is cool. It's like, no disagreement, but that is not in itself an argument.
Yeah, it was, aside from being like just pure baffling in some points, he really dodged some of the questions. I don't know how much of it may have been a language barrier, because he did speak very well. Right.
Yeah, his English is pretty darn good. It's about as good as I could ever really expect for a second language learner.
Okay, yeah. But sometimes I was like listening to him kind of respond, and I was like, I'm not sure he really understood the question. I don't know if it was the way it was worded or what, but it kind of seemed like his response was to a different question, or maybe what he perceived the question was, and that was kind of confusing for me also. Did you ever see that or think that happened?
Well, there are definitely times when I would ask a question, and the response that I got did not actually address the question at all.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was
kind of like Kent Hovind?
Yeah,
to some extent. Although I definitely like this guy more than Kent Hovind. Kent Hovind can...
He's much more likable.
Yeah, he seems genuine. I mean, he seems genuine. Hovind does not seem genuine about anything. So,
and I just got a message from Nestle20. So I will send that to him. Here you go, Neslig.
Anyway, TD, what are your thoughts?
It felt like a lot of personal incredulity during that debate from him. I think Dapper did well. and I feel like his opening was extremely solid and basically unanswered. Otherwise, what really sticks out to me was when you guys were talking about colonial organisms, and he was basically saying like, "Oh, this around the multicellularity example." Basically, he was saying like, "No, this isn't multicellular because you can take cells off of it and they'll go do their own thing." And it's like, have you never heard of placozoans? Because they're metazoans, and one of the ways they reproduce is by basically splitting off another individual.
Yeah, no, the budding thing is common across like lots of different groups of animals.
Yeah.
Like Nidarians do it. You know, this is not an argument.
Again,
That
really.
yeah, TD. Actually, that reminded me. His whole bit about colonialism was just like completely wrong. When he was hey Nestle, when he mentioned, for instance, Chlamydomonas, and he's like, "Oh, well, Chlamydomonas are like they switch between multicellularity." No, they don't. Chlamydomonas are unicellular. These things they reproduce by dividing, right? And the experiment that you're referring to, which maybe he was thinking of a different algae.
That's possible.
I'm not sure, but in the Matt Heron et al. 2019 study, they took Chlamydomonas, which is unicellular naturally, and it became multicellular and co-opted the original multicellular form as the gamete. Like it would release a single. Oh, I don't believe it. He's here.
Ahmed, welcome. Ahlan wa sahlan.
Hey, hello.
Hi. It's nice to meet you.
Yes. So what I was telling everyone here is the way I usually run these is the first thing I do is I try to get people's impressions going down the line, and but since you were the other person in the debate, I'm willing to skip over Nestle as going next and let you go next. Sorry, Nestle, but you know the other guy from the debate is sort of important in that debate after show. So
I didn't have much interesting to say.
Okay. Well, so TD Lane, did you have any more that you wanted to add about your take on the debate before we let Ahmed here go?
Not really.
Okay, so Ahmed, let us know your first impression
About
the debate. How do you think it went? What do you think you could have done better? What do you think I should have done better? Any of that stuff.
Well, I think the topic is a very big one. I think we got a little bit stuck on some subtopics, but I think those subtopics deserve a whole discussion of their own.
Yeah,
I think the theory has plenty. There's plenty of equivocation in this theory. So, for example, when you did your opening remarks, you talked about dissent. Nobody will say dissent is not there. You know, when there is change, there is change. There is diversity. These are the whole thing. The whole matter is interpretation, and the data and the evidence and the facts are the same. So when you go into any specific topic, there are so much details. We can spend 2 or 3 episodes on endosymbiosis or multicellularity or
I'd be okay with that, by the way.
Prokaryotes changed. Yeah.
I would also
So I think this is
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that there are definitely people here who are, myself included, who are willing to go into multi-part discussions with you on those topics because I think, like Steve said, while we might have some serious disagreements, you are someone who has shown themselves able to have a polite and respectful discussion, which is actually surprisingly rare when it comes to anti-evolutionists. So,
Although to be fair, you are on the internet, so.
Well, yeah, in person, most anti-evolutionists I know aren't the sort of vitriolic types that you get out of things like like Nephilim Free or the Egg John Maddox.
Am I allowed to ask him a question?
I mean, yeah. Go for it.
Well, first, I do want to ask because we talked about this off air. Ahmed, would you be interested in? Because you mentioned the Cameron explosion multiple times during your debate, and that's actually a topic. that's actually a topic that I've done a substantial amount of research on. So if you would be interested,
quite a few times, yes.
yeah, exactly. As Nestle well knows, so if you would be interested, I'd be interested in having a debate with you on the nature of the Cambrian explosion and whether it was an evolutionary event or a creation event.
Right.
If you're interested,
fine. Let's do it. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, you see,
okay.
The thing is, all of those topics have this very interesting feature. It is that you look at the data and you do some research on it, and what I have personally observed is that if you go level 1 of research, you reach conclusion A. If you do level B, you reach conclusion B. But if you go to level 3, you are back to conclusion A. So there is this kind of tricks in nature that really needs one to go pretty deep. So if you have gone real deep in the research, that will be really fun, because maybe one of us changes his mind.
Well, I can tell you,
Yeah.
I did in fact change my mind. You probably don't know this, but I actually do have a series of videos that I do called Leaving. It's usually Leaving Young Earth Creationism. I have had a Leaving Old Earth Creationism, but the first episode was me. But since then, it's just been me interviewing people who have actually changed from being anti-evolutionists to no longer being anti-evolutionists. In fact, I am working on setting one up, hopefully either a week from today or 2 weeks from today. So this is a topic that a lot of people do change their mind on. It's just that I find they tend not to go the direction you would prefer them to.
You mean the evolution topic or the Cambrian explosion topic?
Evolution in general. I know a lot of people. I know of a lot of people who were demonstrably young Earth creationist, and in many cases fairly well informed about creationism in general and its arguments, and who are now no longer that. But the people who claim to have gone the other way, I tend to find are woefully bad in their understanding of evolutionary theory, to the point that I doubt they were ever really well informed about evolution. I'm sure there are some exceptions, but actually I do know of a couple exceptions, but not very many. So I do think the trend tends to be that the more research you do, the more likely you are to end on universal common ancestry and biological evolution. But Nestle.
Okay, we'll disagree on that, but let's take it further.
I do want to make sure that Nestle gets in with his first impressions. Yeah. So let's make sure we get that.
Well, I didn't watch the debate from the beginning. I didn't watch the openings, for example. I did watch the sorry. But I did watch the second half, and I think both were great. Of course, I agree more with Dapper, but I think both with being polite and not interrupting and such were great. Although I did find Steve was too much involved for my taste.
Steve does tend to take a. By the end of it, Steve was reasonably actively involved, and I don't know. Look, I see the value in multiple different moderation styles, and I'm perfectly open to having a variety of moderators in my debates. You know, so I've had Erica Gutsick Gibbon moderate for me. I've had James moderate for me. I've had Praise I Am That I Am, the creationist, moderate for me. I've had Steve moderate for me. I've had Maya, one of my subscribers, moderate for me. So, you know, I'm definitely someone who thinks that it's good to have a bit of a variety in there, because there's something to be said for the sort of hands-off approach in some cases, like James might have. But I do think that sometimes there is some reason to have a more active approach in the sense that Steve might have. I mean, I definitely have things that in that I would have had, if it had been up to me, I would have had Steve do things a little bit differently. But then again, that's true for every moderator I've ever had. So, yeah, I think there are valid criticisms to make of Steve's moderation. And I also think that there are genuine positives to his moderation style.
I have a little input here. Actually, I think the main success of this one, if we count it as a success, is that we didn't have a specific structure other than the opening and the discussion. But I think the good thing is that for the majority of it, you know, we didn't, you know, like jump over each other's times and interrupt, and it didn't go into a screaming contest.
Well, so honestly,
makes it horrible,
The reason I like that format is it's basically a litmus test for every time I first interact with someone in this kind of setting. If they can follow that format without it becoming just a horrible screaming match, that means it's someone who's worth my time to talk to. And there are people who I've already said, nope, you cannot do this, so it's not even worth bothering with you. So, like, for instance, there was a guy I debated called Mr. Batman. There's no value in ever talking to Mr. Batman. Because given that kind of format, he was incapable of staying on topic even vaguely, and he just became rude very quickly. And so that's why I'm done with him. He's not worth my time. But you are someone who, while we disagree, I have always had good interactions with. In fact, people probably don't know, but we were talking fairly extensively on Facebook, in the messenger, and the whole time I thought that you were always having interesting responses, and we even chatted about stuff that's off topic to this. Like, we talked about what would you recommend as the order to read the Quran in if someone has never approached it before, and so we had a discussion about that was completely not to do with this. And so I appreciate that we have managed to have a lot of very cordial interaction, which is why I am more than willing to go deeper into some of the topics that were brought up. Like, I would be willing to have a discussion just about endosymbiosis. Let me take a look at my notes. If you want to have a talk about things like the ancestry of modern animals through the fossil record, tracing transitional fossils and stuff, that would be another great discussion to have. If you wanted to bring up things like genetic algorithms and whether they can or cannot be used as sort of an analogy for biological evolution, I would be willing to have that discussion. I think any of those would be great. Like Jackson said, we could set up something about the Cambrian explosion. So yeah, I think that you are someone who is definitely worth having more conversations with. I enjoy talking to you.
Thank you. So either the Cambrian explosion or even the matter of this, fossil or lineage through the fossil record, I think they're very, very interesting topics. I was actually having a huge discussion for the last 7 days about this matter of the completeness of the fossil record and tracing mammals back to, unicellular life. And I've been having some discussions with some evolutionary biologists that, I would really have discussions with you rather than, because, they get so nervous. And it's like we're fighting, and they would immediately jump at you. If you do not accept it, it's because you do not understand it. But
yeah,
it doesn't have to be this way.
Well, plus most actual scientists in the field are too busy to have these conversations. That's why most of the people who have them are either doing it as a hobby or are not actually professionals in the field. Like, I'm not a professional researcher in anything. The closest I've ever come is when I was getting my degree. And I did have to do some original research. In fact, in some cases, quite a bit. But
they're Professor Internet with a PhD in Google Research.
I would. It's amazing how much information is available for those who would like to find the information. That's a matter of perseverance.
You're absolutely correct on that. I would be interested in having the conversation on the Cambrian because, for instance, you made the claim that most of these organisms appear in like a 7 to 10 million year period, when that's not accurate. For instance, the Cambrian explosion was over a period of like 25 million years.
Yeah, because at the very least, at
the very least, because the base of the Adabanian was revised over the last like 2 decades. So the length of time that the Cambrian explosion, in like the extremely narrow paleontological sense, has occurred, was at least 25 million years.
Also, like the exact cutoff between where it begins and where it ends is like arbitrary. Like
yes, absolutely.
Wherever you put the line, there's always interesting stuff happening before, and always interesting stuff happening after.
If you guys want, I mean, I'm okay with you having an informal discussion with the understanding that no one really prepared for this. So if you guys want to, like Jackson, if you want to give like a quick overview of why you think the Cambrian explosion is not something that's exceptional or unexpected evolutionary in terms of evolution, I'd be okay with that. And then if Ahmed is okay with it and he wants to give his take on why he finds your explanation either convincing or not, does that sound like something you guys would be okay with?
Yeah.
I'm okay with that.
All
yeah.
right. I'm not going to super time it. Just don't ramble.
Okay, sure. Yeah. Well, my the problem with the Cambrian explosion, in a nutshell, is that the by and large the public perception of it was that this is an event that occurred like immediately, which it's an explosion. Explosions happen very quickly, and part of the reason for this is you had very popular books in the 80s, in the late 80s, like Stephen Jay Gould's work, Wonderful Life, which kind of makes it seem as though, based on the fossil record that they had at the time, it seemed like you had a whole huge burst of diversity essentially out of nowhere because they had no idea what the preceding organisms were from the late Precambrian, like Dickinsonia and Kimberella, things like that. Mm-hmm. But with more data, we actually see that there's a continuity in these organisms. We have like lineages such as mollusks, which are so good they actually cross the Cambrian, the Ediacaran Cambrian divide. And so we can see from something like Kimberella, which is sort of a pre-mollusk, and then once you cross the Cambrian, you get like Woaxia and Orthorhynchus, these things which are like the basal most mollusks, and then you get mollusk diversity. The same is true of arthropods. You get sort of proto-arthropods like Eulingia in the Ediacaran. Then you get the very earliest arthropods in the early Cambrian, and then you get a burst of diversity sort of around the middle Cambrian, and this leads to ultimately your modern groups of arthropods. But in all these cases, you have a continuity. You have things that cross the boundary, so like Claudinids and Anaborinids, things like that. Which
also you have to bear in mind that like the fauna that we get from like the Butch shell, these are lagerstaten. Like they are very rare and very exquisite preservation conditions, which do not occur all over the place. So when you have like a deposition like that, and before it you don't have any lagerstaten, and then it will appear to you have these organisms up as if they appear from nowhere. So
exactly.
Preservation issues is an relevant factor here.
So I'd like to get Ahmed's take on what's happened so far, because I think we've gotten the points in that these fossils are rare, but there is continuity between the Precambrian and the Cambrian, and the Cambrian explosion, rather than being a single event, was a process over at least 25 million years. So Ahmed, what do you think about that?
Well, I think like three things. Number one, whether it's like 12 or 25, looking at the grand picture is still small. So you're looking at 3.8 billion years or something of history of life, and then this very small fraction, where all of those organisms pop into existence, complicated ones and very diverse ones. Definitely not like any of those that came in the previous epochs. And then they don't only do that, but they continue to morph into more and more different life forms. And then you have to appreciate the mathematics of it. So if you look into population genetics, you will find that they're doing this calculation called divergence time. And when you look at how much difference in DNA do you need between two creatures of significant differences in morphology? For example, if you look between the human being and the chimp, you will find like 1.3 million base pair difference or something, and those are things that really make a difference. So how much change is there between a fluffy, slimy thing that was on the seabed or something in the Ediacaran, and now it is a full-fledged fish or a really sophisticated creature? Is millions upon millions of mutations, if we take the claim of the theory that random mutations is responsible for this. And it's not just mutations, it's mutually constructive mutations. So this mutation is taking it to this direction, and the next one is taking it to the same direction. So you find things like gills, and then soon enough you find things that are between gills and lungs, and then you find things with amphibians that are more like lungs, and then you find lungs few million years later. So
that's after the Cambrian.
That's after the Cambrian.
Way later.
So the continuation of this, the spark.
Let's keep it to the Cambrian to make it as simple as possible. I would say.
Even if you look in the Cambrian, and I once had this discussion with an evolutionary biologist, and I told him, pick any precursor in the Cambrian and one animal form that is known to have existed within the boundaries of the Cambrian, and let's calculate how much time, if this is really a random process, how much time should this take? And I did a calculation, and he did a calculation. I did a calculation. He didn't come up with a specific species. But then I said, okay, let's do it abstractly. Let's just consider that this is a creature that is undergoing mutually constructive mutations in a row. And according to my calculation, which we cannot do in this casual discussion, after the 5th or the 6th mutually constructive mutation, you are out of time. You are beyond the 4.5 billion years of Earth life. So the point here is whether it's 12 or 25 or even 30, or even anywhere from few millions of years, is not enough just to make one creature morph in one of its organs change. Set aside all this crazy amount of creatures. So this is the mathematics.
When you referring to the calculation, are you referring to Durward and Smith or Behe?
I'm sorry?
Like you mentioned the calculations of how long it takes for these mutations. So
hey, before we get to that, I do want to make sure we get this super chat in. So Rodent No Last Name said for $10, sad that people searching for quote truth ignore actual data. And so thank you very much for your super chat, Rodent No Last Name.
Can I?
Go ahead, Jack. Go ahead.
Can I respond to this? For one thing, it's not always, mutations are not always like, it's not always a long gradual series of just like incremental tiny minor mutations. Sometimes you can have actually mutations which cause relatively large changes, things like a heterocracy, where you change the timing of development of different parts, which actually plays a pretty big role in evolution. So rather than having like 100 mutations, which each make you, or which each slightly change like your facial region, for instance.
I'm getting some feedback from Ahmed, I think.
Ahmed, is there any way you could mute while you're not talking? Because we're getting some feedback from you.
That I'm gonna be what again?
We're hearing like sound from your end while you weren't talking.
Yeah, is there any way you could just mute yourself while you're not talking? Just because we're getting a lot of, I'm not sure if it's feedback or if there's wind or something.
Sure.
But furthermore, these calculations are often misleading because you're looking at these mutations and you're saying like every mutation is equally likely when that's just not the case. Or you're only looking at it in the sense of point mutations. Like it would take 100 point mutations for this structure to happen, which is generally not the case. Generally, you have something like a duplication, and then you have point mutations in that duplicated gene, which cause large changes, right? Because now you have two versions of this one gene rather than just one. And so mutations can have a huge range of functions, which is why in examples where anti-evolutionists or creationists are doing these number games, I tend to just ignore those because it kind of misses the reality of how mutations work.
Yeah. Also, if you're done, I have two points to make. If I remember correctly, there was a paper like a year ago, or maybe more, about the genetic evolution of animals, like animals as a whole, and it shows that counter to your perception, the evolution of like the phyla, like arthropods and vertebrates, etc., that are associated with the Cambrian, these evolved by losses of genes instead of gaining new ones, basically. So it's kind of backwards. Like it's almost like they were specializing into certain body plans, and then they lost some genes for those. But my second point was like you said in the beginning about the creatures in the Cambrian were unlike those that came before. But it's a bit vague when you say unlike. So can you specify that by what you mean unlike? Like Jackson mentioned Kimberella and also the mollusk. What's his name again?
Eulingia, the panarthropod.
Yes. Also that, and I mean the mollusk, like the Precambrian mollusk.
Oh well, that was a Kimberella, and then once you cross into the Cambrian, you have Wiwaxia and Orthroxanthus.
Right. So like Jackson mentioned, creatures that are like those that are in the Cambrian that came before, but
because they share the same part.
Yeah. Maybe you think they are unlike, but what do you mean by that?
You're still muted, by the way.
Muted, sorry.
If he's talking.
Hello?
Yep, you're back.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, so you said two things here. So about the matter of losing genes. So this has always been, perplexing to me, because if we put forward an argument that evolution is happening by losing information, then we need to justify the reverse gradient, because this means that the more we go back in time, at least until a certain point of time, we need to find creatures that have so much wealth of information that losing some of those controls unlocks features. So it means those creatures are really loaded with features. So then the question comes back, if we have such a comprehensive design at an earlier stage, until when does this gradient come? And why does the gradient start from very low information
Can I make a correction quickly? Like you think that having more genes means you have more like complicated features. Like for example, you have a creature with arthropod legs and vertebrate gills and such. No, it doesn't mean that. Genes, you can have a huge number of genes, but depending on how you use them, you can still have a very simple body plan. I think there are a few. There are a few single-celled organisms who have way more genes than we do.
Yeah,
it's just a matter of how to use them.
Amoebas, isn't it? They have, or like some of them have like 4 times the number of genes that we have, but they're amoebas. Like you would think that they're quote simpler, but they have way more genes than we do. Same with like onions; they have way more genes than we do. Same with grass.
So it's not like when you go back, you have like the more genes you have, the more complicated things become. They can still be simple, but it's just the number of genes that they have. They use it in a different way, and it doesn't necessarily translate into a more complicated body plan.
Right.
Yeah, the very aspect of losing genes that makes a creature unfold into a phenotypically more sophisticated creature is perplexing from the information aspect. More information means you have more potential for sophistication.
Yeah, more potential doesn't necessarily mean you have more sophistication. Like we already pointed out that amoeba have way more genes than we do, but they are still very simple compared to us in the body plan aspect. So it's I think you are coming from a perspective of like a very, very intuitive perspective of more genes means more complicated things, but in biology it's not that simple.
Right.
Ironically.
Yeah. So if you put it that those extra genes were not used for anything, then the question
they may be used for different things, but not for making more complicated body plans. They may be used for different things. Yeah.
So they are relevant to the complexity of the body plan or to the sophistication of the final phenotype. So the question then will be, if this is the case, then why would losing them cause the creature to unfold into an apparently more complex creature?
I can actually answer this question. So when you look at the phylogenomics of like the animal kingdom, for instance, of metazoa, and you see that they're losing certain types of genes, but other gene families expand through duplication events. So for instance, you have gene families which are duplicated immensely. things like being related to cancer prevention, for instance, because the more cells you have, the more likely you're probably going to have cancer. So genes in those families expand. They duplicate over and over and over and over. Like P52 is one of them. But other genes that we don't need anymore, we can lose without any deleterious effect because we're in an environment now where we don't need them. Right? That's what Dapper was talking about in your original debate with E. coli, right? It didn't need the genes or it didn't need to metabolize citrate in an aerobic environment, but it had mutations which gave it the ability to metabolize citrate in an aerobic environment, right? And it's the same thing sort of going on here. You change or you increase your gene families related to certain functions, which then allows you to have new functions. Like, arthropods probably didn't need to evolve like a totally new bunch of sets of genes to evolve limbs. They just needed to change the way their existing genes were being used, by and large. Does that make sense?
Well, the question then is, if you have a gene that you're not using, being set aside, you're not that much, then even according to the assertions of the theory, this gene will not is not something that is being selected against. It is something dormant. Nobody knows what it's doing, even the creature itself. If it's doing something, then losing it loses something. If it's not doing anything, then it's maybe a neutral mutation. Nobody cares.
Yes,
So the
that's
question
correct.
then is, if this is the case, it still means that those genes were irrelevant to the context. So losing them or keeping them shouldn't really have any specific effect, especially if this effect is more complex.
Well,
now, if you are looking at a gene that was a regulatory gene, for example, that was prohibiting a creature from, being better or being bigger because there isn't that much food, and then you lose it so you can get bigger without the control, then yes, that might have. But can this kind of thing really be the reason, the driver of real complexity arising from division of information? I find this quite a far-fetched.
No. I think you're misunderstanding. Losing genes because of other mutations. I think that's actually it. So when you lose a mutation, when you lose a gene through neutral mutations, so this gene, it doesn't matter what happens to it now. So even if you have a mutation which knocks it out, it doesn't matter to you as an organism because you're not using it for anything. But losing that gene does not mean you're getting more complex. You are gaining genes in other regions through duplication events. And then those duplicated genes are being accepted for new functions. So, like in the case of fins to limbs, you don't have to have a whole bunch of new genes to evolve limbs from fins. You just need to change the way fins are expressed. Change the way the fin rays are expressed. Once you have minor incremental changes to those, then you get these new features. Or they're not really new, they're just building on the existing features. Right? And so that's where the complexity is coming from. It's coming from adding on to the existing features through duplication and heterochrony and these other sorts of mutations. But it's not the losing itself that is making you more complex. Does that make sense?
Yes, this makes sense, which goes back to my original question. So for you to get into having a limb by modifying what a fin is, because the fin has inside the reins for the fingers, etc. You start from having the fin, okay?
Yes.
But then there is no fathomable way where you can think you can get a fin without a fin altogether in a precursor. So this is now.
I'm sorry. Say that one more time, please.
If you are looking at potential modification for a fin so that it becomes a limb, okay, we might think of things. But then how did you get the fin?
So we actually
you couldn't
can.
have got the fin from deletion of information because then.
Well, actually, we
You
can,
know?
and we do. This is kind of like the example that Dapper was talking about in your debate, where you're on a train and you're saying trains can't exist. We actually have already done lots and lots and lots of not we, us here, but the researchers have done lots of experiments where they modified either zebrafish fins or the fins of bichers, and by simple mutations, or actually by having bichers, for instance, living in a partial terrestrial environment, their fins become like the fins of lobe-finned fish, which were our ancestors. But they're not lobe-finned fish; they're ray-finned fish. And
Hey,
so you can
real quick.
express certain.
Real quick, I
Oh,
want to
yeah,
make sure we
okay.
get a $5 super chat in from Roden, no last name again, who says creationists fail at understanding populations. It's not one critter gaining one mutations. It's 1 billion critters with a 0.01% chance of, I think he says meant mutation, but he wrote muration.
Yeah.
And if it's muration, then you need to tell me what that is.
It sounds like something involved with rats. But
It might
anyway,
be. Sorry. keep
But
going.
yeah, so we've already, they have already, the researchers have already done experiments where you can raise bichers, which are fish, ray-finned fish, in a partially terrestrial environment, and they develop lobe fins. Or you can tweak the genes of zebrafish, and they develop lobe fins. They can show by simple modifications, either in the environment or in the genes, that going from fins which would not be able to support you at all to fins which, again, can't quite support you yet, but they're on the way there, are possible by simple mutations. And actually, here you go. Yeah, there's an example of it. So this has already been done. This is really not a point of discussion or a point of controversy for evolutionists. Do you see what I mean?
I think the whole point here is it is like somebody who knows what has happened already, and then you say, okay, if this is the case, the prediction is so and so, trying to prove his hypothesis after the fact. The whole trick is, if you want to prove an hypothesis, you should not know the result already. So it is very different when you look at a researcher who sees this kind of thing and who knows what are the differences between that gene and this gene. And then you calculate these things as if they are independent events, and you calculate probabilities. Because how it happened really originally is not this way, because the mutation does not know where you want to go.
But it had to, though, because we can look at the gene. We can literally look at the genes that are different between our fins, between our limbs and the fins of lungfish and the limbs of coelacanths and the limbs of zebrafish. We can literally look at these and see which mutations in which genes were involved in making limbs from fins.
Hey guys, real quick,
So,
this administrative bit, but Nestle, your presentation isn't coming through anymore, so if you could just stop the
I see
presentation.
it.
I'm
seeing
not.
it.
He might have to restart it, because if I'm not, no one else is on this.
Yeah,
on the
because I'm
audience.
seeing he's showing the picture with the actinopterygians and
I'm sure
vertebrates.
he is. I'm just saying I can't, so he might need to restart it because I'm the one who's
Okay,
screen
gotcha.
sharing, so if I can't see it, the audience can't.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Well, the point is, we know which mutations in which genes occurred, like we know which did in the past, and so by tweaking, and the point of tweaking existing fins like zebrafish or whatever is just a way of showing how this can happen. Like, this is the gene that's involved in that process.
I'm still not seeing it, Nestle. I'm sorry.
Sorry. I don't know why.
It's probably on my
it.
end. Look, because Jackson sees it, and Jackson's internet is absolute terribleness. I'm assuming it's my problem, and Jackson, I'm right about that.
Can Ahmad see it?
I can't see it, so I don't know
No,
why.
but I mean, Ahmad, can he see it or?
Oh, he might be able to. I guess we could keep it if we think it is really important for Ahmed to see it.
Well, at any rate, so the point I'm just trying to make is we can already see by doing the phylogeny which changes occurred, and by doing these experiments where we induce these changes in living organisms, this is just showing we know this is what happened, and this is how this happens, and we can show developmentally how this happens. Right? It's the thing about the train, riding the train while saying trains don't exist.
All right, so here's my take, which can be the seed for this debate if we are going to do this. that we are seeing it now because we see that this gene has this morphology and that other gene has that other morphology, and we can see the differences. And we see how many differences and where they happen. And
Yes.
When you're starting from a backdrop that it happened by mutations, then your conclusion will be that it happened by mutations. And then the answer will be, well, there is no other way that it would have happened.
Well, there are other ways.
But if you start from the point that you have the precursor, and you need now to consider what are the mutation rates and what are the error correction rates in that specific creature, and then you do specific probability calculations given the population size of that creature and the duration of time it takes per generation, and then you end up assuming that one mutation has taken place in the right place, and this is the first one. And then you start making a conditional probability calculation for what is the odds for the second one to happen in the right place, given the population size and given the mutation rates and given the error correction rates. And you also consider how much extra fitness it gives and how much time it takes to be fixated in enough members of the population so that the mutations that are happening in the population in the second iteration find enough members in that population so that the random mutations will end up doing enough trials, and error correction will not kill it, and offsprings will not go away, and they will not be stepped over. And you do this calculation in this way, in chronological order, it is very challenging. And
no, it's not. It's not challenging.
I would really like to have this done maybe in online. We open an Excel sheet, we have the real mutation rates, we have real genome size, we have the number of mutations difference between two morphologies, and we do the calculation.
Ahmed,
see where it takes us. Yeah.
So Ahmed, for instance, when I point to, say, the peppered moth example, which is an example of, in modern times, an organism which underwent a mutation in I think it was a promoter region, if I remember correctly, but it underwent this mutation, which caused a novel morphology that did not previously exist. We know I think to like 2 or 3 years, like when this mutation occurred.
We have historical records of the first sightings of melanistic moths, which means, and we have reportings of sightings from naturalists before that, so we know at least within a few years.
It did not exist. Sorry. It did not exist in this population. We know the mutation that caused it, and we know, and so after that mutation happened, because we know the exact mutation, the population, or this mutation, went almost to fixation in the population because of the selective pressure, which is birds eating it, right? Because the birds can see the white moths against the trees or whatever, because everything's covered with soot, whereas they cannot see the black ones. This happened in less than 100 years. Less than 100 years. So and I know moths have a very short population time, right? Fine. Okay, granted. But the fact that this happened, and it's not just in moths, we can come up with other examples where you have this sort of fixation in natural environments. But it really doesn't take very long. Even with sexually reproducing organisms, it does not take very long.
So in my experience, when I try to do these calculations myself, the first point, mutation, is not the issue. Typically, you can resolve that given specific parameters of a specific creature. You can resolve that you will do the first point mutation in a reasonable time. The problem is when you go on calculating further mutually constructive mutations with that one, that will continue in the same direction, so that the fin, for example, will change from this to that other one, which are all going from a fin that is not supporting you very well to a fin that is supporting you very well. And you take these conditional probabilities in cascade, the amount of time that you need to go from this one mutation to the next mutually constructive one increases almost exponentially with more mutations that you add. This is maybe I'm doing the calculation in a wrong way, but
so I think you are doing the calculations wrong, because what we're seeing is you see that these in natural populations, in sexually reproducing natural populations, we have these mutations which can go to essentially fixation in a relatively short amount of time. This is just in arthropods, right? This is excluding like bacteria and protists and things like that. Okay, but if your calculations are coming up with way ridiculously longer times than are like observationally needed to reach fixation, then your calculation is wrong. It's not that the data itself is wrong; it's that your calculation is wrong. You see what I'm saying?
It's not the fixation that takes more time. The fixation will always take the same time when the mutation has occurred.
Hey
No,
guys,
that is not the
hold
case.
on, real quick.
Yeah.
I want to say welcome to
Yeah.
Dr. Daniel Stern. I always get it wrong. I think it's
Cardinal.
the E is
Am I
Cardinal.
here?
Is the E isn't pronounced?
Welcome, Dan.
It's just Cardinal. Am I here? Can
Yes.
you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I don't have my
Wait,
camera
Dan?
on.
Dan, are you there?
on a different-
But
Sorry,
no,
I'm
it is definitely not the case that mutations always take the same amount of time
hey
to reach
guys.
fixation in a population.
We have a new
That's just
panel
not the
member,
case.
so I want to make sure that we get his first impressions of the debate in before we continue on, because, like I said, that's how I run my after shows. Everyone who's on the panel gets their first impressions, and then we can continue on. So, Dan, what were your initial impressions of the debate? And I know there were a few things that I said that were primarily for your ears, so...
Yes, there were a few things that were they sounded very familiar. So I greatly appreciated that. Actually, let me just say that I only have a few minutes, so at some point I'm just going to have to be like, sorry, I'm done, gotta go. So at some point I'm just going to vanish with no reason, just so everyone knows. But so my thoughts on the debate were that it was a really enjoyable conversation to listen to. But I felt like the what we kind of I felt like the talking points were very kind of just out of the standard creationist playbook, and it was all stuff that you've all heard before, and it was totally good and fine, but there was nothing original, no original synthesis of new ideas to attempt to refute the kind of idea of evolution. It was just the same kind of stuff, and there was irreducible complexity and genetic entropy, and now we're talking about just now the waiting time problem. Like, these are all things that are well trodden, and there are evolutionary explanations or rebuttals for all of these things. And that's kind of where I came down, that it was, I think, better and more informative than most debates of this nature were, but it relied upon the same set of exchanges that we often see in these conversations.
Ahmed, do you have any...
Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was directed at you, so you would definitely get the right...
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think that in the majority of conversations you will have more or less maybe not identical arguments, but similar ones. But I think that one of the important things here is that evolutionary discussions or discussions about evolution and creation are typically stuck in the point of is it evolution or is it not evolution? But maybe an elaboration of that discussion can be, if it's not evolution, then what? And I think a major blocking issue here is that creationists will typically go that it's not evolution and it is creatures poofing into existence. I actually have a different explanation that maybe other creationists do not agree upon. But there is a different explanation, and that a different explanation is originating from similar arguments, but it doesn't need to be that organisms are poofing into existence. Theologically, this is acceptable, but I think there are two premises here. Number one, if you look at the holistic point of view to the theory, there is the very big question mark of what is the real direction of the gradient of information, and why there is life altogether, which will bring us back to abiogenesis, which is not part of the biological evolution, but is a very related context. And then the very first question is how much information was in the protocells or in Luca, and then is it a fair argument to say that all of this extra information that are resulting in all of those morphologies are coming from random mutations and natural selection? And I think that at a point, there needs to be a conversation.
Nestle, all your mouse clicks are coming through. Can you mute?
With evolutionists and creationists on both sides listening to each other. Because I think it boils down to this. If you consider a genetic algorithm model or a trial and error model, can such a model without an objective function produce this kind of flurry of information and the kind of diversity of life that we see? I think this is the essential part where discussions will become very different, because you will always start from the same arguments, but where the arguments end up is the topic. And I think the topic is so big that you have to have a little bit more focus.
Hey, real quick, Ahmed, hold on one second.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I just wanted to make sure because Nestle's mouse clicks were coming through, and
I'm sorry. I didn't realize I was.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I just wanted to make sure that you knew. Yeah, and Ahmed, back to you. Sorry, it was happening a lot, so I wanted to try and cut that out. So.
Okay, so I think that, for example, this kind of discussion that we're having now, doing a real CPS calculation, we say that irreducible complexity, for example, and then somebody brings up the flagellum, but the flagellum is so many proteins, and then somebody will say, okay, you can reduce it to a type 3 secretor or whatever. But then if you are looking at something like the kinesin or like diary, it is already a very small thing. And protein motors are, for example, something that we should look at when we are looking at irreducible complexity. I'm not sure how many real discussions have happened around something that is very basic like this, something like the ATP cycle. So these kind of things, it is the same general argument, but what are you specifically discussing? How much is it critical for life? How do things like microtubules pop into existence? How do things like kinesins pop into existence? How much are they ubiquitous, from the process of cell division to moving things around, to moving even material over neutron fibers, neuron fibers, etc. So I think there isn't enough debate and, peaceful and respectful conversation happening between people who are on the intelligent design or creation side.
I warned that I would have to run on short notice, and there it is. So sorry I couldn't stay longer, everybody, but I gotta run. Talk to you all later.
Okay. And I'd like to get some responses in from that. And I guess I'm sort of by de facto just sort of becoming a bit of a moderator, and that's okay by me. So Jackson or Nestle, would either of you like to address that? And Ahmed, if you could maybe mute while they're responding, just
Sure.
Because we're getting some like ambient noise.
Sorry for the noise because I was interested to join you guys and I had to do this short trip, so I'm moving in the car.
It's all right.
So
No worries.
It's okay.
Yeah, the only request is that while you're not talking, just mute so that way it doesn't come through while you're not talking. But yeah, no, it's fine.
So my response is, you're kind of right about why are there no debates on things like the evolution of the citric acid cycle or kinesins? Well, the sad reason is it won't attract very many people, because once you kind of get to the point where you're arguing like between two people who are extremely knowledgeable in like cell biology, you're getting into the biochemistry and that kind of stuff, you're going to lose like the vast majority of your audience. That's why we tend, well, for me at the very least, I tend to stick with organisms that, we have a fairly good grasp on, because everyone's like, oh, I know what a fruit fly is. I know what the peppered moth is, what E. coli is. But when you start getting into things you're talking about, like, oh, well, this is where phosphatidylcholine comes in and all that kind of stuff, the audience is lost. And it's kind of sad that happens, but, this is YouTube, so.
Yeah. By the way, we are at about an hour, so one thing I will say now is if people have questions about the topics we're bringing up now or the topics that were brought up during the debate, please ask them. And if you don't super chat, please do at least remember to at Dapper Dino. so that way I make sure that there's a better chance that I see it. And because every once in a while chat does go quickly, the most secure way is obviously to super chat, but it's far from necessary. So, but if I do miss something, remind me. So, like, if you guys do have questions about that, we will be taking questions, and that could be for any of the panel members, including myself. So feel free for any topics about what we're discussing here or during the debate. And so continue on, everybody. Sorry.
But yeah, no, you're kind of right, Ahmed. That you know, these discussions tend to fall into the same exact lines of argumentation, like encode or genetic entropy. And we've all heard, you know, these things numerous times. Heck, several of us have made videos, you know, on our channels regarding those topics. So, but yeah, the more like super complex and very obscure topics, while they may be very interesting, are just not the ones that like most your average person is going to understand or be interested in. Like, how many people are going to be interested in whether one genus of barnacle is replacing another genus of barnacle over millions of years?
Darwin.
That is actually well, okay, fine, Darwin, but that is actually a debate that occurred in some paleontological circles. But like, how many people actually care? Not very many, right? It's just the nature of the debate, the nature of YouTube. So, what do you think about that?
I'm surprised that actually some of those videos that science explainers would go into explaining things have really hundreds of thousands of views sometimes. So, for example, I have a background in, due to my background as a communications engineer in things like quantum mechanics and you know, electromagnetics, etc. And some channels like PBS, for example.
Yeah.
You will find a discussion about a very detailed thing about general relativity or quantum mechanics with hundreds of thousands of views. And I'm sure
Yeah.
really there isn't hundreds of thousands of people around the world who know what the guy is talking about. But sometimes even when the discussion is so peculiar, people just like to listen. Actually, I think the matter of biological evolution has a very strong connection to our worldview and our theological positions and our you know, existential questions. That even if you are going into a discussion where you will have to go into tricky stuff, you can number one, you can simplify it. Like, for example, when I thought I'm going to talk about the Hydesian as an example, I thought that the best thing is to show a video, because no matter how much time I'm talking about this molecule that is walking on a special bridge that gets built when it wants it, nobody will imagine it. But
right, yeah.
Yeah, but actually, I'm serious. The first time I saw this, it brought tears to my eyes that these things are really happening, and they are so beautiful this way. I couldn't believe as an engineer that such ingenuity can come about through a random mutation process that would generate such a magnificent integrated system.
Well,
and I think that these details are the ones that need to be addressed to the public by evolutionists, and these details are the ones that need that we sit and do the math and see how come this thing can happen and what are the precursors. And I think that the absence of answers to these questions is the real issue that really only put in the books and they don't come into debates.
Well, actually, in fairness, Nestle and I did a video on the evolution of a protein, of an enzyme called ATP synthase. So there are papers, there are lots and lots and lots of scientific papers on the evolution of ATP synthase, as there are for the evolution
to be fair, I think you made a video before I came around with the editing. I think so.
Well, I don't. Well, at any rate, we did a video a long time ago on ATP synthase. Now, the fact that people on YouTube like Dapper and TD and myself and Nestle, the fact that we, won't usually broach like the evolution of tiny molecular parts in debates doesn't mean no one's doing research on them. There's absolutely research on it. There are papers that show the step by step evolution of ATP synthase from formerly existing ATPases, right? There's loads of data on that. And there's loads of data on like the evolution of kinesin and all sorts of other proteins. We actually, Nestle and I, we happen to know a guy who does like the evolution of like abiotic or proteins or amino acids, sorry, in under abiotic conditions. Right. So there's loads of research. Yeah.
Hey
And
guys,
so
I want to
there's
read
loads
a
of
super chat
research
real
on
quick
this.
when you're done, Jackson.
I'm sorry.
There's a super chat for when you're done.
So, go ahead.
Okay, so for $2 from Rodent No Last Name, he asks, does life, in quotes, require, quote, God magic? And my answer is, it's not actually clear what it takes to produce life. And so I don't have any particular reason to think it has to, but I guess I can't say for certain. And I guess we can go around the panel and get... Please keep them relatively short, but we'll try to get answers to that. So Jackson, we'll start with you. We'll go then to Ahmed Neslig, and then TD Lane, because that's the order that I'm seeing you guys in. So Jackson?
You want my answer? Does life need God magic?
Yeah, it's got a question mark.
So.
We gotta answer the question, right? He paid $2.
I don't think it requires God magic.
Okay.
That's my position.
Ahmed?
Well, I think it requires something that is not materialistic. And if you invoke something that's not materialistic, that's definitely supernatural. And I wouldn't call it magic. I would just call it something that is outside our reach. And the reason I think so is that with all the knowledge that we have, make even a protocell living according to our definition of life. The only way that we can make it living is to change the definition of life.
Okay.
Somebody might say this will change with years, but I don't think so.
All right. And Nestle?
I don't know. It's a difficult question to ask because it's outside of science, of course. Like science could never say magic is not required. It can only identify like what is a plausible mechanism that we can test and make predictions about. So in that regard, it even if it is required, we would never know it by science. But in my own opinion, I don't think so. That's my opinion.
Okay. And T Lane?
Sorry, I'm a little bit busy because Otangelo in chat cited a paper by John Sanford and Baziner that has a quote he used.
All right, so no comment?
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough.
It's taken secondarily out of context, from what I can tell. So it's like...
All right, well, there we go.
I should take Sanford's word.
So, again, if you guys do have questions, you can super chat or tag at Dapper Dino, and we will ask them as long as they seem reasonably on topic. If it's like, how's the weather? Probably not. I'll read the super chat, but I'm not going to sit there and answer it for you. So,
Can I make an extra comment on this matter of life with magic?
Oh yeah, I guess so.
All right. So, I think that there are specific, at least in my religion in Islam, which is an extrapolation or a continuation to other Abrahamic religions anyway. There are some specific assertions that are made. One of them is the impossibility of human science to create life. Actually, we have a specific verse that if we translate it to English, it would be saying that it will be a call out to the people who do not believe in God, that no matter how many people group and team up together to create a fly, they will never be able to do so. And I'm not really sure why was a fly specifically picked up, but it is pretty intriguing to me that so much research is done over fruit fly. So the assertion is, no matter what you do, you cannot make a fly. And I think this is there for a reason, and the reason is that what it takes to make life is either completely supernatural or is a prediction that God is putting on the table that human science will never reach the point to create life. And I think that this is a very simple argument for naturalism. If you want to completely break a religion like Islam, just make one fly.
So can I respond to this?
It's a standing challenge.
Yeah, I'd like to hear Jackson respond.
So I think Dapper, you already know my answer. Nobody has ever even tried to make a fly because there's no point. There's like essentially no scientific value in trying to just make a fly, right? The experiments, which I think you're referencing, where they are dealing with abiotic or the prebiotic conditions that life would have evolved in, or the parts that make up life would have evolved in. They're not trying to make a cell. They're not trying to make an organism. They're just trying to make parts which, under conditions, could contribute to an organism. But I'm not really going into abiogenesis. But regardless, the other thing that I kind of wanted to respond to, that was my major point, was that no one's trying to make a fly. And what would be the point of that? It doesn't really matter. No one cares enough. No one's saying, like, we want to destroy religion, so we're going to make a fly or something like that. No one's doing that. It doesn't matter. The other thing was, what makes life? It has nothing to do, as far as I've ever seen, as far as I've ever read, with supernatural things. Like, if you look at a prion, for instance, or a viroid, these are things which are not organisms. Dan may get mad at me for saying that. They're not organisms, as far as most biologists would consider them.
Wait, are we going to have a viruses are or aren't organisms debate?
Look, honestly, in my opinion, they do reproduction. Fine, whatever. Okay, they do reproduction, and under certain circumstances, they can make.
In my opinion, life is a process, and when a virus virus infects a cell, then it's alive. Then it does living.
All right, well, keep going there.
But the point is, it's a set of. You're right. It's a process. It's a set of conditions which, together, once met under certain conditions, produce what we call life. A prion on its own is not living. But when a bunch of prions infect like a cow and cause was it Jacob Creutzfeldt syndrome, then it's kind of acting like a living organism. But is it a living organism?
Jackson, I think I hear angry geneticist sounds over yonder.
So that's a valid question.
I don't take a hard position on this, our viruses living debate. I don't. It doesn't really matter to me, because I'm also in the position that species is kind of a difficult term and purposefully hinders conversations. So maybe that's why. I don't know. I'm sorry, Dapper.
Oh, no. So what? I would like to hear a response to that question, though. Since life is a bit of a gradient, and we have things that are sort of on the cusp of being alive, and things that are less so, and then we have things that no one disagrees are alive. What is that? How does that inform your statement about life and its sort of special nature?
Yeah. At any rate.
Whoops.
Also, you brought up the kinesin proteins. Now, I remember a review article about the evolution of motor proteins, and I can link you the article in the chat if you are interested. It's an open access article, I think. Yes, it's open access. I also put the title in the chat because the link will get blocked, I think. Yeah. So there you go.
Okay. You met me with a question about the gradient of life, right?
Yes. So, at least as I understood it, the question, and maybe I'm wrong, Jackson. Feel free to fix me on this. So there is a gradient of going from things that everyone agrees aren't alive to things where there's some debate to things where most people would say, yeah, this is probably alive, all the way to things where there's, again, no debate the other way.
Right. Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah.
So my take on this is an analogy with what we do as humans. But let's first go back to the fly. So when scripture, for example, talks about a fly or a mosquito, so we have a fly and a mosquito in the Quran, actually, and those are, some of the smallest things that are perceived, small insects that are perceived by people who receive that scripture. So you cannot have in scripture something like create a bacteria, because bacteria was not known. But I think that the message here is create the smallest thing that you will have consensus is living, and you will not be able to. And if you go back to the debate that I was having with Dapper there, so in my opinion, life is a matter of an identity. So the question is, does a virus have an identity? Does a virus really care about life? So to me, by analogy, we look at programs that do certain things that we program in my world, and then we have viruses that are essentially messages. They're small pieces of code that are essentially messages that hijack something so that you get access to a system, or that you deny service somewhere. It's essentially very similar to what the kind of diseases that viruses cause. So I think that a virus does not have the necessary analogy to life. A virus is like a programmatical message from a life form to another life form. Now it raises the question of where do viruses come from? Because a virus doesn't make sense that viruses were there before living cells. Because what a virus is a system that hijacks a living cell, unless you believe in RNA hypothesis.
It may be possible. Like of course, this is still an area of research, but I've seen that there may have been viruses at the interface of between when life emerged, and all a virus really needs is a ribosome in order to copy itself, and the ribosomes could theoretically exist outside the cell if it's able to, if you have a right environment. So yeah,
or vice versa. We have organisms like bacteria who don't, on their own, meet all the conditions of a quote living organism, like the rickettsia bacteria or chlamydia. These cannot live on their own outside of cells. They require other cells to live inside. But they're living, aren't they?
We have an incomplete biochemistry. Like we can synthesize vitamin C. We can also not synthesize various amino acids. We need to parasitize basically other organisms for that, or at least consume them.
Yeah. This is a general question about parasites altogether, regardless if they are unicellular or not. But the issue here is a little bit different issue. Is that for the virus to reproduce, it needs to hijack some living cell to complete its cycle.
Well, again, the basic thing, of course, some viruses need to reverse transcribe the RNA into DNA. But there are viruses, there are RNA viruses who only need a ribosome to copy itself, and that's it.
Yeah. So the question is, where will it get the ribosome from?
Yeah. Of course. In today's world, the ribosome will be found in cells, but there's of course some ideas about perhaps the ribosome occurred before there were cells, like there were individual cells.
Well, I think it would eventually boil down to whether you believe in RNA world hypothesis, and I think this RNA world hypothesis is not in very good shape these days. But so
the RNA hypothesis is very well supported, although it's not supported in the sense that RNA was the first living thing. Like there are also other ideas like metabolism first, where metabolism was the stage before RNA, and then DNA became the primary information storage system. But again, these are ideas being discussed. It's not settled, of course. But yeah, can you still hear me? Or am I breaking up? Oh. Oh, he left. I mean, maybe he disconnected.
Dapper, Dapper, they're saying they can't hear you. in chat.
Uh-oh.
Sorry about
Uh-oh.
that. That was probably me
I
while I
can
was
hear
trying.
you.
Oh, I know you can. That was me while I was trying to fix weird webcam stuff going on. So sorry about that. I muted myself because I had to do some typing and whatnot.
Whoops.
Yep.
Well,
So
we lost him.
yeah, we lost Ahmed.
Maybe
So,
he got tired of us. I don't know.
Yeah, the silent stream. Yeah, it's like the silent spring, except it's a stream.
Could have gone kicked whatever device he was using.
Yeah,
to
he's still
die.
got he's still got the join link. He's welcome back.
Yeah.
So I do think that a lot of anti-evolutionists try to use some kind of ill-defined and never given a mechanism use of supernatural powers to explain the origin of life.
Yeah.
It's almost always unfalsifiable, and it definitely doesn't produce any new avenues of research if you simply make that conclusion.
That's my main concern. Yes, like
Yeah.
when you for interest look at like a video.
And wait, people didn't hear me read
oh.
the super chat. The super chat in the first place said, "Is God magic a good replacement for abiogenesis?" Sorry, this is me being the worst streamer on YouTube.
But what I was saying, like if you go look at some like the Discovery Institute of like a YouTube presentation, you can hear them talk for hours upon hours, like complaints about how abiogenesis is not solved yet. But then if you had a chance of saying like, oh, all right, let's for the sake of argument, abiogenesis is wrong. Like, what is your explanation? Just assume abiogenesis is wrong. Go for it, and then they have nothing to say. Like there is no content behind any of it. It's just a negative argument, and that's all they have.
Yeah. Well, so I'm going to take a few more questions. Obviously, we can't do questions for Ahmed while he's not here. But if Ahmed doesn't come back in about probably 10 to 15 minutes, I think I'll just end it because we've gotten everyone's impression. We've gotten some good discussion in with Ahmed, and you know.
And I like how we went from Cambrian explosion to abiogenesis. Still.
Always.
Always.
Rodin last name.
Dapper.
Hold on one second. Rodin last name. I think I did, but if in case it didn't come through again, your most recent super chat was is God magic a good replacement for abiogenesis? And before that, you said, does life require quote God magic? Which I think I read all those, but if I didn't, there you go.
Dapper, what was it you were asking earlier? Because I was preoccupied.
I don't remember, dude. The conversation has moved on, and I no longer remember. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
But I mean, it is definitely the case in terms of abiogenesis that it is definitely an open question, and
Yeah.
But the thing is that science has a really long history of taking open questions, answering the question, and then the answer isn't necessarily that we can't explain it using science.
Yeah.
I mean, that was we didn't always know how inheritance works, and now we have a pretty darn good idea. There's really not much of a question on that anymore. So inheritance wasn't some kind of mystical thing before we explained it via DNA, and even though there were ideas about that. So, for instance, if we go to actually, we could take a source from an Islamic source, where someone was asked how it is that children end up resembling the mother or the father, and the answer essentially was that whoever released their genetic material first would be the predominant source of what the child looked like. We know that that's just not true at all. And so, but the fact that that was something that people thought at one point, and people thought that it was to some extent controlled by, divine intervention or whatever, doesn't actually mean that that's what was happening.
Yeah.
So
there are lots of interesting ideas about how abiogenesis might have taken place, but I have my own personal opinions. Like I don't accept the primordial soup hypothesis. I'm more leaning towards like a hydrothermal vent theory about it.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of options. Yeah. It's not clear at all what actually happened.
It seems thermodynamically speaking, seems more plausible for it to have occurred in a state far from equilibrium, and in a soup, it's just equilibrium basically.
Yeah.
Except for the occasional lightning strike, and that's it.
You could even argue that if it's a shallow pool, maybe
Yeah.
just the sunlight is enough to provide some gradient. Although then you would have to get into like how likely is it that very early
Yeah.
life could photosynthesize, and it's not
And also,
super likely.
like one research, like if like he has a very good book written, like Nick Lane, the book on the vital question, and he makes the argument that you like sunlight, even though it has the energy potential to make very complicated molecules, it also easily destroys them, basically, and it doesn't really get you anywhere from that point on.
Yeah, I can see that argument there.
Yeah.
And like I said, I don't necessarily have a favorite abiogenesis hypothesis. I really don't have a dog in that fight. It's one of those things where it's just like whatever actually ends up being the actual answer is fine by me. I do care that we get an answer. I'm interested to know what it is, but I don't have a dog in the fight. And welcome back, Ahmed.
Yay!
Welcome back.
Oh no!
And then he's gone again.
I don't know. Maybe he has trouble connecting.
It might be like a network dead zone or something. That's always the possibility.
Can we get F's in chat, please?
Yeah, F's in the chat for Ahmed's his mobile internet, which is spotty at the best of times. So
As he isn't here, shall we all agree that referring to the Old Testament as a plagiarism of the Torah is a bit silly?
Wait, the Old Testament as a plagiarism of the Torah?
Yeah, I just got this in my Twitter timeline. It's not correct in any way.
Yeah, the Torah is part of the Old Testament, and none of the rest of the Old Testament that isn't the Torah is even close to a plagiarism of it. I don't.
Yeah, the Old Testament is just the Christian version of the Tanakh.
Yeah, I just and really, hey, welcome back again. So the only real big difference between, like, say, the average Protestant Old Testament and the Hebrew Tanakh is that the ordering and the numbering of the books is a little bit different. That's literally it. If you look at the Hebrew text that most Protestants translate from, it's the same Hebrew text. So, yeah, I don't know. But sorry about that, Ahmed. We lost you there, but welcome back.
Sorry, the battery just ran out, so.
That'll happen.
Yeah. So this was a scriptural discussion now, yeah?
A little bit. There was someone had sent TD Lane something silly about the Jewish scriptures.
It wasn't sent; it just appeared on my Twitter timeline.
Okay. It was just scrolling through. Yeah, someone had said that the Torah was the Old Testament was a plagiarism of the Torah, which none of that makes sense.
Yeah,
it's like saying that the Old Testament is a plagiarism of the Old Testament. Or something.
Yeah, exactly. It's the Torah is just
that's
part of the Old
legitimately what it
Testament.
is.
Yeah.
Well,
So, as we all know, the entire Quran is just a plagiarism of Surat al-Baqarah.
Yeah, so the whole is a plagiarism of the part.
Yep, it totally makes sense.
Yeah. So we're talking about the viruses thing. So yeah, if you believe in RNA world hypothesis or something else, but I think the point that is made by religion here is, or at least my religion is that let's take a living thing that is obviously living. It has identity. It strives for survival. It has independent life, and I think that's the point behind mentioning a fly. And another instance, a mosquito. And the point is, bring this thing and try to make it. So now, by extrapolation to our modern time, if we look at something like algae, for example, that has its independent life, or cyanobacteria, I don't think that even this challenge can be met. Now, the thing that, I'm not sure it was Jackson who said it or what, but should human beings be interested in actually creating biological robots?
I think that's a different question.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you asked if
Well, no, what I said was
impediment. Yeah.
Well, what I said was there's no reason to create like a fruit fly from scratch just for what? I mean, what would be the what practical reason would there be for creating for like taking, okay, we know everything about a fruit fly, just say, and we're going to make it. Well, what would be the practical application of that? What would be the reason? Now, for like a
maybe like rapid cloning, maybe, but of course
I guess.
you can do that more.
Well, but still, you would just do
cloning.
cloning. You know, you would just do
Yeah.
cloning, right? But you wouldn't have to make it from scratch. Like with like biotechnology, for instance, there has to be a reason for it. If you're going to clone something, then there's got to be a reason. Like you're cloning tissue to use for like grafting or something like that. But just creating organisms from scratch, I don't really see a point. I don't know why anyone would even go for that.
I actually think that you might run afoul of a lot of ethics boards if you tried that.
Maybe you would, but my point is that there's just no reason to do it. That's my point.
I think the point behind it is not really that you're doing a fly here for utility. You're doing it to fulfill a challenge. But the guys who will be doing it to fulfill the challenge are obviously people who are interested to fulfill the challenge, to prove a point.
I'm not sure any researchers are in that group, though.
Yeah, no, it's like saying, like, can you make a spacesuit that works on the sun? Well, maybe. Maybe we could, but what would be the point?
Yeah, so I think one thing to remember is research scientists do not pay attention.
Maybe I just want to take a dive in the hot plasma.
Yeah.
Well, so one thing I think that's important to note is this conversation about creationism is not one that occurs in actual working science labs, generally speaking. They actually, to be honest, creationism is, and I know that this isn't the nicest thing to say, but for your average scientist, creationism is on about the same level as flat Earth. There is just no point to engaging with it. It's mostly nonsense, as far as most scientists are concerned. In fact, most scientists are not even aware that there are still people trying to get one over on evolution. So the idea that some scientists would conduct this study to try to create a fruit fly from scratch to no real benefit to themselves, to satisfy the curiosity or the challenge of people who are not really in the field, is kind of, let's say, far-fetched, that anyone would actually find the motivation to do that simply for that challenge. And I do also want to say we have a $2 super chat from Rodin, no last name, who says, once you invoke God magic, all arguments fail? He does have a question mark, so I'm going to go ahead and say that assuming, that's why I raised my voice at the end, assuming that by God magic we can reasonably say supernatural intervention, I would not actually say that all arguments fail. I think it is possible to construct an argument that would include supernatural agency that doesn't necessarily fail for the reason that it includes supernatural agency. I don't have any off the top of my head, but it strikes me as unlikely that all of them would fail for that reason. And Jackson?
I really don't even know how to respond to that. I'll pass it to whoever's next.
Nestle? Get unmute.
I got no comment on that.
Okay, T. Elaine?
Closing thoughts?
No, this is to respond to that question, which I'm not entirely sure it was a question, but I had a question mark on it.
Again, I've been kind of paying attention to chat because nobody else is.
So no comment.
Yeah. No comment.
And so Ahmed, do you have an answer to the question? Once you invoke, and I'll just say supernatural agency, all arguments fail?
I think he's
No, it's
oh, sorry. Oh, go ahead.
Science will say we don't know. Theists will say God did it. The whole trick is that you are not saying God did it because it's a scientific gap. My position on this will be, if you're asking me why electricity happens, I will not say God did it, because I have no theological reason to say that God is not using a natural law to make this happen. But I would only say God did it in the things that God, in my religion, says explicitly that you will not find a naturalistic or methodological naturalism derived explanation for it. And these are the things, these things are very clear in scripture, in my scripture at least, and they are, you can enumerate them. But just to go and invoke God did it all the time is actually the antithesis of proving anything about religion. So I would say that if you choose God did it in the right things, it shouldn't be a failed discussion, because all what science will have to offer is I don't know.
I will say, though, I could probably find some philosophers in Islam who might disagree with you about God using natural laws.
I think maybe the person who asked the question was pointed towards like if you make the like for example if somebody makes the argument the light that we see from stars, well, God just snapped his fingers and made all the light go towards us so we can see them and enjoy them. But of course, when you go down that route, then evidence becomes meaningless, basically. Like maybe that's the point he was making.
That might be. I'm not sure. And wrote no last name. If you do want to clarify if we didn't really address it, you can just @me. I will recognize that as part of your continued support of the channel in terms of Super Chat, which has been very much appreciated. So yeah, I do remember we're probably only going to be up for a little bit less than a half an hour. So if you do have more questions for anyone on the panel, please do let me know.
We should definitely. I would still be interested in like having a further discussion with you on the Cameron explosion if you want to do that at a later date. So
I would be interested in that happening too.
Yeah.
So why don't we work on setting that up off the air? We can try to get Ahmed, you, and Jackson in contact, and I'm sure that there are a number of channels that would be perfectly happy to host, including Steve is probably willing to host. I certainly would be. Modern Day Debate might be. So, I'm sure that there's a number of viable venues.
Like, also you can also recommend some videos that you made, Jackson, like the two-part video on the Cambrian explosion and also Darwin's confidence. I think that would be a good starter for Ahmed to catch up, basically, on what your position is.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, we did. Nestle, Evograd, RJ, we all did a video, or we did 2 videos on the Cameron explosions, parts 1 and 2, which just kind of gives an overview on the prelude to the Cameron explosion and then the explosion itself. And then we did a couple of videos which were a response to this guy regarding the Cameron explosion, and so we further elucidated some different parts about it, which is called Darwin's Confidence.
And there's also another video about the Precambrian ancestors, I think it's called.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah. Our Precambrian ancestors, which was one we did where we just looked specifically at life in the Ediacaran. And
new fossils, there were some new fossils discovered about but the Precambrian bilaterians, basically basically the relatives of everything that is bilaterally symmetrical, the arthropods, the vertebrates, the mollusks, everything, almost everything you can think of, basically, that it is not a sponge or a jellyfish or a plant.
Yeah. So we have an interesting point that was just made in a super chat by Patrick Dennis for $2, who says, can't recreate a tornado either, must be supernatural. So I actually think that raises an interesting question. If the inability of scientists to create a mosquito from scratch or a fruit fly from scratch or even a bacterium from scratch says something about the supernatural origin of life, does their inability to recreate a tornado say something about the supernatural origin of storm cells in the atmosphere?
No.
Is that a question to me?
I think so.
I think so, yeah.
So it will not be a question about the supernatural nature of tornadoes or of storm cells unless, in my point of view, God says you cannot create tornadoes, because then it is a religious assertion that tornadoes are forming in a supernatural way. But this kind of assertion is only available in few things. Maybe if I count them, they will not be more than 10. And tornadoes is not one of them. So it means there is a specific verse in the Quran that establishes that after the initial creation, God takes the throne. The translation would be like that, but in Arabic it's not exactly that. But the translation would be like that. My explanation to this is that the throne means that it's like a king who has, you have your kingdom and things are restless until you establish your rule, and then you sit on the throne. It means things are established. It means things will go mechanical from this point. So it means that God, as part of his creation, established physical laws that are predictable. And the things that are still in our world today that need invocation of the supernatural, you can essentially say that it is the insertion of human souls, because they bring in special creation for each single human being. I cannot think of so many other things. And maybe if I think so hard, I would find one or two more things. But earthquakes, storms, rain, etc., etc., the religious assertion there would be that you can find the laws that control them. But for something like the rain, for example, or some natural phenomena, you will find that God is reserving a place for prayers to intervene. I actually have a video about that, about how God might be intervening in the natural laws, and I'm using quantum mechanics as an entry point, collapse of wave function specifically. And I like quantum mechanics because it's related to my background more. But what it says is, if you are totally unaware of anything except the natural world, then you have to be stuck with the soul. You have to be stuck with self-awareness and with free will. This is a clear assertion in religion. But other things are, maybe some theologians in my religion will disagree, but I don't think they will have very strong grounds on it. I would be happy to debate any of that.
This does bring up an interesting point, which is that, so one of the things you said was that whether or not humans can reproduce it is significant in terms of if you can find a place where God said that they couldn't.
Yes.
So, but does that not mean that in order to actually use this argument effectively against, or not against, but with someone who is not currently convinced by your position, that you would then have to convince them that your religion in particular is true, which actually seems like a higher hurdle than just convincing them that supernatural agency might be required in some instances in the natural world?
I don't think that this is a requirement in my religion in particular. It might be a requirement in other religions. And the reason is that my religion acknowledges almost every other religion that has a supreme deity.
Okay,
So,
deity, yeah.
So I would acknowledge Yahweh, for example, as being the same as Allah. I would acknowledge God the Father as being the same. Probably Brahman is the same, etc. Maybe Odin is the same. And I would say that those religions had those extra partners introduced later by humans, and that the reason that one religion after one religion came is to recorrect the course. And I don't think that in any of those religions you will find a religious assertion that free will and awareness and emotions, etc., which are grouped under the word soul, is a naturalistic process. You will not find that. In none of those religions you will find, for example, that God does not intervene if you pray to him. So there is always this reservation that prayers work. So if I make those assertions according to my religion, I think I will be just saying that God is in control and that he chooses ways that are predictable in the majority of phenomena, and he keeps his fingerprints in the historical events that have taken place, like the creation, the initial spawning of the universe, what we call the Big Bang, maybe the creation of primordial stars, etc. Specific events that he specifically says that he has intervened in, and others that he says that he still continuously intervenes so that we can find him. So that somebody who is looking for God and wants to find something that he can feel can find him. And one of those things that I always refer to is our own being. We feel that we are not this body. And one of the assertions, like we cannot create life from scratch, is that we will not be able to explain our self-awareness and our consciousness. It's impossible. And all the attempts have failed, regardless the so long attempts to reproduce it by calculation or by whatever, artificial intelligence or whatever. What is, for example, claimed to be the upcoming singularity is a theological impossibility in my religion.
Okay.
We will not be able to recreate it.
So we're closing in on when we're ending it. There's a couple things I want to address. Actually three things. One is Jungle Dragon said that Africans aren't Semitic. I would like for you to go tell the people speaking Ethiopic or Amharic that because there are in fact a host of Semitic peoples in Africa.
The
so-
Simon Jews. Pretty neat history, actually.
Yeah, there's
he's saying Europeans are Semitic currently.
Well, no, he also said that
the
Africans
Israel.
weren't, and the Europeans are. I understand he has a video about that, so maybe I'll check that out. But we also have a question from Brian Stevens, which, so I'm gonna read the question and I'm gonna say something after it. He says, "Do people who believe in these other gods go to the best afterlife?" And I actually am going to say that I'm okay with a one-sentence answer to that, but I do not want to have a discussion on that because it is theology that doesn't, in my opinion, touch very much on science, which is something that I don't really talk about. If it doesn't contradict the science, then I don't really particularly care what it is. But then we also have a super chat for $10 from Volander. Sorry about this; it's a very long name. It might be Volan Dr. Gingerson. I think. I don't. Is it? I'm sorry, man, or woman. I don't know. I might be Volander Gingerson. I don't know. I'm not sure. But there's a $10 super chat that I'm going to read after we get that quick thing. Ahmed, if you want to quickly, and by quickly I mean in less a sentence or less, answer: do people who believe in these other gods that you say are more or less the same as Allah go to the best afterlife?
People who believe in a god believe in an afterlife. That's a fact. Now, it depends if they find evidence that he has sent an overriding message and they deny it because of pride and prejudice, that it will ruin their afterlife.
Okay. And so the super chat says, if supernatural things were real and part of existence, what keeps them from really just being natural or being beyond study or comprehension, other than the claim by religious texts and proponents? And actually, that is one of the more complicated philosophical discussions when it comes to religion and how it relates to things like science, is what actually is the distinction between natural and supernatural. So I think actually I'd like to start with Ahmed and get what he thinks might be the distinction. So is there a distinction between natural and supernatural? And if there is, how does that make the supernatural become beyond study or comprehension? And what do you think about that?
If it's causal, it's natural.
Okay, so anything causative is natural, including God?
God causes things. God is uncaused.
Okay, but does that mean that there isn't really a supernatural-natural dichotomy?
There is no dichotomy because everything natural is a product of the supernatural. It is a matter of agency. Whether God chooses to do some things directly, which makes them supernatural, or chooses to make them out of established causality that makes them natural, in our perspective.
Okay, so there are certain... I'm trying to make sure that I get this. So your position is that there are certain natural laws, and if God causes things to happen according to those laws, we can call it natural. But if he were to suspend those for some reason and do something outside of them, then it would be supernatural?
Yes, or whether he chooses that some things, like consciousness or like our soul, will not be explained at all by any natural law, not a matter of suspending. They just do not comply to these kinds of laws. They comply to their own laws.
I mean, I actually, when pressed for a definition for things like miracle or supernatural, that is actually pretty similar to what I tend to give. The question then just becomes, do we have reliably observed such instances? And that's not a question I really care to get into. But does anyone have any other takes on what the dichotomy might be between natural and supernatural?
Well, one comment about uncaused. I think if the most common interpretation of quantum mechanics says radioactive decay is uncaused, but I wouldn't consider that supernatural if it's uncaused. I think about the dichotomy, it basically becomes what we know or what can be known and cannot be known. The distinction. I don't know how you can define it.
Okay.
Other than that,
when
we didn't understood lightning, for example, then we considered it supernatural, but now we understood it, and now it becomes natural. Basically, that's the distinction I make. So it's basically not an inherent issue. It's just the way we look at things.
Okay. All right. So I think that is it, and we are now pretty much coming up to the point where I'm going to start doing some wrap-up stuff. So there is a guy on YouTube. This is just me doing some quick channel news, and then I'll ask everyone to give their outro and plug whatever they need to plug, and then get out of here. So for channel news, so let's see. Tuesday is Kent with Bent 52. Then Thursday, I will be premiering a video. I'm not positive which one it will be. I think it might actually be a mirror of the creationist, or professional creationist tier list. So if you haven't seen that, or you just want to watch it again and give my channel some views, hop over there. If it's not that, it might be a video that I did about Answers in Genesis News, or I think they just call it Answers News, whatever. Then Saturday, I'm hoping that either this Saturday or the next one, I will be able to get a new Leaving Young Earth Creationism with a guy named Invoking Theism, who is on YouTube. Jackson, I know you know him.
Yeet.
Yeah, so he seemed like he would be an interesting guest for that, so I have invited him onto that, and so I haven't heard back quite yet exactly whether or not he's okay with coming on that Saturday, but hopefully he will. And yeah, that's it. Make sure that you like this video, subscribe if you haven't, and follow me on Twitter, I guess. I have my, speaking of which, right now my display name on Twitter is in Egyptian hieroglyphics, because I can.
As you
Wow.
Yeah. I found out how to do it,
wait.
so I was just like, you know what, I'm doing it. My display name on Twitter,
Dapper.
Egyptian hieroglyphics.
Excuse me, Dapper.
Yes.
Can you give me a translation for my name in hieroglyphics on Twitter?
Yeah, you just have to tell me exactly how you want it. Do you want it transliterated? Do you want some kind of meaning translation? Something like that. But yeah, I can.
I'll let you know about that off air.
I literally have my textbook on Middle Egyptian grammar sitting within arm's reach of me right now. So there you go.
Do we know how Egyptian was pronounced? Like
Kind of. So we have well-attested late period Coptic, which is the last period in which the Egyptian language was a spoken language, and so we have some ability to recover vowel information from that. The problem is that the farther back you go into the past, the harder it is to recover that, and also Egyptian writing got a little bit weird, where it started to become not just archaic spellings, but in some cases kind of creative spellings. And so it's not always clear just how literally a spelling actually preserves pronunciation. Because for one thing, we know that the feminine ending in Egyptian, which is actually cognate with the feminine ending in Semitic languages, was at, which is, that's essentially identical to the Hebrew one. And it's what the Arabic feminine ending is when it is, when it precedes a suffix with a vowel. So, you know, like normally in Arabic it's but if you put like the first person singular possessive suffix, it becomes ati, because that has kind of been lost, which is why you write it with the 2 dots for a T. And so
I think you should do a video about like the evolution of languages. Maybe do a video of how I think Egypt is like related to like the Hebrew and Arabic, right?
So it is. So the Semitic languages are in a larger groups called Afro-Asiatic, which includes the Egyptian language, which is closer to Semitic than it is to the other Afro-Asiatic languages, but also includes languages like Berber. So they form a superfamily.
Yeah, it's like also like the Indo-European languages, like everything in Europe and some parts of Asia are also related.
Yeah, it's
really,
not
really neat.
So Egyptian isn't technically a Semitic language; it falls just outside that group.
Yeah,
it's sort of like there's some debate as to whether Luwian actually falls outside the Indo-European category. So yeah, it's one of those, like, it's almost there.
It's transitional.
It is basically. Yeah, you can actually see there are a lot of direct cognates in Egyptian to various Semitic languages, and it has a lot of similar grammatical features. Like it features a triconsonantal root system, enclitic pronouns for possession, incorporation of pronouns into the verb to double mark, so both subject and object. All that stuff is stuff that you can find in Semitic languages and that you will also find in Egyptian. But anyway, to get back to the question about pronunciation, yeah, we can to some extent recover pronunciation by using Coptic and historical linguistic principles, but it's not 100%. And so now modern researchers who are working with hieroglyphics, they have a sort of standardized way to pronounce them that does not pay much attention to historical linguistics in terms of which way they would actually have been pronounced by real people speaking the language.
So if you went back in time and tried to speak Egyptian to like an actual Egyptian or ancient Egyptian, it would be like an anime fan trying to speak Japanese.
Yeah, you might be able to write a letter to them.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't likely be able to actually talk to them, which is one of the things that's kind of unrealistic about the Stargate movie. It's like, I don't care how good your hieroglyphics are. If you went back to talk to ancient Egyptians, you would have trouble. Your best bet would be to like find a scribe and try
at best,
to write
at
letters.
best you would have a very thick accent at best.
Oh, it would be worse than that.
Yeah, probably worse.
Yeah. All right, so Jackson, what do you have for your final comments?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, my channel, I have a couple of different videos that I'm thinking about doing. One with you, Dapper. Maybe. I watched a couple of Ahmed's videos, and I was kind of thinking about maybe doing a response to one of those. A couple other videos, which are.
Oh,
I watched your video on evolutionary predictions. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I think he can. He's just muted.
Hello.
Yep. Yeah, he can hear.
Oh, I watched your video on evolutionary predictions. I referenced your video on what is it, linguistics and epistemology. So I also watched that one.
Yeah.
So those are the only two videos of yours that I've actually watched. Just those two.
Yeah, the one about linguistics and epistemology.
Yeah, we may be doing a response to the evolutionary predictions ones.
Yeah.
You present some very interesting information in some regards, and I don't know, but we'll see. Anyway, yeah, lots of other videos that are secret stuff.
Secret.
Anyway.
All right, and by the way, I know that. So I set this stream up pretty last minute because basically there was requests for an after show, so I was like, all right, I guess I'm doing an after show. So I don't have everyone's links or anything in here, but before this goes back up live, it will have links to everybody's channel, to the original debate, and all that stuff. So, sorry, whenever I do a last minute after show, the description is always the last thing to get fixed. So, Nestle, you got any last words for us?
No, I think it was a very interesting conversation. Again, of course, I don't have a lot of agreement with Ahmed, but I think he's a very cool guy to have a conversation with.
Oh, absolutely.
Certainly in comparison to the many of the other people that we have talked to.
Yeah.
So, and one thing I like to recommend, like I have already recommended the book by Nick Lane, The Vital Question on abiogenesis, but I have also another book called The Emergence of Life, or the what's the title again? I always forget the full title. The Emergence of the Fourth Geosphere. That's a subtitle. The Origin and Nature of Life on Earth, The Emergence of the Fourth Geosphere by Eric Smith and Harold Morowitz. It's a very technical book, but lots of information on it.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, TD Lane, what do you got for us?
Nothing much. I've been kind of useless throughout this talk, but I've enjoyed hearing Jackson and Ahmed talk. I think this has been quite a fun after show.
I agree. I've had a lot of fun with it.
Actually, I do have one thing, Dapper.
Uh-oh.
The entire chat and all your fans need to ensure to shame you for continuing to have the pile of shame with the Alpha Legion not being finished.
Yeah, look, I don't have an excuse, so there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was thinking the other day, like, what lighting setup should I use? Because I just moved, and like, what would be a good place for light and whatnot? And I have a few options. One is even outside, and I'm not sure which one would be best. So I'm reassessing where I should do painting and whatnot. But my paints are here. I did bring them. I brought the models. So, but last but certainly not least, the other person in the debate, Ahmed. What do you got for us?
Well, number one, thank you for having me on this panel, Dapper. It's a nice gesture. So thanks for everybody who had said really nice comments. I enjoyed chatting with you guys. I think that discontinuity between people who take on the evolutionary line of thought and those who take the creation line of thought needs to have much more dialogue in a peaceful and respectful manner, and so does people who do not believe in God or are agnostic, and people who are believing in God, and people who believe in God but on different religions. I think if we can make plenty of those discussions, things will get much more, much more better.
Okay.
For sure.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Well,
so
thank you
thanks
very much.
for a nice discussion.
Thank you. Yeah, I had a great time, both during the debate and the after show, and I hope I will see everyone here for Kent with Bent on Tuesday. So goodbye, everyone, and have a wonderful whatever day it is. I think for some people it's probably going to be Monday already, but I think for most of the world it's still Sunday. Or wait, Saturday. Yeah, Saturday. I don't even know what time.